Right now, the baby boomers are quietly facing a crisis that will inevitably happen to every future generation, and this crisis is called forced retirement. You see, right now, baby boomers are between the ages of 61 and 79, which means that although many boomers have left the workforce, there is still a decent chunk of them working. In fact, in 2024, 15% of the entire American labor force consisted of baby boomers. However, with that 15% remaining, what we are now seeing is they are rapidly starting to retire. And the scary part is, their retirement is not this happy celebration where they're voluntarily exiting the workforce, but they are quietly getting pushed out due to companies restructuring, downsizing, or making room for a younger, cheaper, and more tech-savvy workforce. I mean, in the past 2 years, this has happened to my mom, my dad, my stepdad, many of their boomer friends, and many of my friends' boomer parents. Boomers are quietly being pushed out of the workforce and into retirement, and what's scary is that many of them are not financially ready for this move. In fact, 1 out of 4 people over 59 do not have any money set aside for retirement. And for those people who are not financially ready, they are met with a very scary reality. Ultimately, they have 2 options to choose from. 1, look for jobs in an already extremely competitive market where they're undesirable. Or 2, start taking on Social Security and try to figure out how they can survive off drastically less than they were making before. None of which are ideal, but when faced with reality in this tough labor market, they quickly come to the realization that they really only have one option: take on Social Security and figure out how to make it work. And that is the harsh reality that many boomers are facing right now. They're not entering the retirement that they hope for, but they're being forced into a retirement that they're not ready for. And in this video, I want to talk about why this is happening, how it's impacting boomers, and what we should learn from this. Because this problem is not unique to the boomer generation, but it is a problem that ultimately every generation will face. And this video should act as a warning to everyone on why it is so important to prepare for retirement. And so let's start off this video with chapter 1, how it all ends. So this is a video that I've been thinking about making for a while now, because it's a topic that I've been watching play out to many people close to me in my life. The narrative first showed up about 2 years ago, when I was caught by surprise to hear my highly skilled stepdad lost his job of 30 years to the company becoming more corporate and restructuring. Then 9 months later, my mom called me saying she lost her job of 20 years due to the company wanting a younger, fresher workforce. And then I spoke to friends and heard that this happened to their parents too. And finally, a few months ago, I got a call from my dad who lost his job of 15 years due to the company downsizing and AI replacing many jobs. It's like the same narrative was being played over and over again as if it were a trend. And when you see this happen to someone close to you, the best word to describe it is sobering. It stops you in your tracks and makes you come to the realization that this is how it all ends. This is the final chapter of this corporate game that we are all playing, and watching this play out before your very eyes makes you reflect on life and work, and makes you understand that companies will always prioritize their bottom line. Everyone is replaceable, and loyalty doesn't guarantee stability. Many people will dedicate their lives to a career, make extreme sacrifices to move up, to ultimately be escorted out of the building with their box full of stuff and 3 months of severance pay. It's a very sobering thing to see. This is how it all ends for many people professionally. And so the question is, why is this happening? Why are people who have decades of experience, knowledge, and loyalty being pushed out of the workforce? Well, let's talk about that in chapter 2. Why the boomers are being pushed out. So I want to start this chapter off by repeating a key idea that I said in the last chapter because it's the foundation for everything we're about to talk about. Companies will always prioritize their bottom line. Everyone is replaceable, and loyalty doesn't guarantee stability. This is the way businesses have run, and this is the way that businesses will always run, because the number one goal of a business is to make as much money as possible. Businesses exist to generate a profit, and when people become too expensive, too outdated, or too inconvenient, then they're out. And in my experience, seeing boomers being pushed out of the workforce, there are three common reasons why. The first reason is age discrimination. Once you reach a certain age, you quietly become less desirable to companies compared to a younger person. You may be seen as having less energy and more cynicism. With your decades of experience, you're more likely to expect a higher salary. You might not fit in culturally with a younger team. You're often not viewed as a long-term investment because you're close to retirement age, and companies may assume they'll get fresher ideas from someone half your age. And although these are just stereotypes and not always true, this is often how the working world sees older people. Once you pass a certain age, you become a lot less desirable professionally, making it harder to keep a job and harder to find a job once you lose your job. The second reason is technology gaps. Another reason that boomers are being phased out of the workforce is because there's this common stereotype that older people don't have the same skills when it comes to technology. Whether that's learning a new software, adapting to remote tools, or staying on top of digital trends. And although this is not always true, younger people are generally seen as digital natives that require less assistance, whereas older workers are seen as outdated that could slow down everyone. And oftentimes, when a company looks at two candidates, one that is 28 and the other is 62, the younger one almost always seems as the safer, easier choice due to being a digital native. And this is making it harder for them to find and keep jobs. The third reason is AI replacing many of their jobs. Many of the jobs that boomers held for decades, especially the jobs that did not lead to having tons of money saved for retirement, like customer service, accounting, clerical work, logistics, and HR, are being automated or replaced by software tools. They're losing their jobs to machines, and once they're replaced, the sad truth is that they are at the point in their career where it's too late to make a major career change, and the only option is to move into retirement, and if they have to work, do a more simple job on the side. There are many reasons why boomers are being phased out of the workforce. However, there is a pattern. As you age, you become less desirable professionally. And once you reach that point, you're going to need money set aside for retirement. However, many boomers are finding themselves unprepared for retirement. And let's talk about why that is in Chapter 3, Why Boomers Are Not Ready for Retirement. Now, the boomers are known to be the richest generation in history. However, it's important to note that the boomer generation spans for over 19 years, and the older members of the generation experienced a lot more fortune than the younger members. And when it comes to the lack of retirement preparation, in this video, we're gonna focus on the boomers who are starting to enter retirement age, who are called late boomers. Late boomers did not experience as much fortune as the older members. And so let's start off with some stats. Among this demographic, 1 out of 4 do not have anything saved for retirement. And for the people who do have money saved for retirement, the average amount is under $269,000, which is nowhere near enough to comfortably retire for 30 years. And so what happened? Why are these late boomers not prepared for retirement? Well, there are a number of reasons, and let's start off by talking about a more DIY approach to retirement. So late boomers were born between the years of 1956 to 1964, and so many of them started to enter the workforce in the late 70s and early 80s. And this was a moment in time when companies were moving away from offering pensions and moving towards a more DIY approach of the 401k being common in the 1980s. And the Roth IRA wasn't established until 1997, when late boomers were in their 30s and 40s. Late boomers were sort of the guinea pig to this new DIY approach to retirement, and because their parents didn't have experience with this method, they had to figure it out on their own. They had to learn where to start, how much to save, and where to invest. And so many boomers lost out on decades of compounding simply because they didn't know what to do and no one had experienced this before. The second disadvantage they had was the Great Recession. When it comes to income, generally your peak earning years are in your 40s, and by 50, it starts to level off or decline. However, with late boomers, it's a different story. When the Great Recession started in 2008, they were in their peak earning years in their mid to late 40s. And the recession really impacted them at this moment in time. Late boomers went from an employment rate of 98% to 80% a decade later. And because of this, many found themselves in a tough spot financially and were forced to withdraw some of their 401k to cover expenses. And it also slowed down or completely stopped their contributions due to circumstances. And they saw their incomes decline compared to older members of their generation. I mean, according to an article by Boston College, late boomers' income fell in their 40s, and in their 50s, they averaged a household income of $73,000, compared to $88,000 for mid-boomers and $104,000 for early boomers. The Great Recession hit late boomers in their peak earning years, which stunted their retirement growth or completely wiped it out. The third disadvantage is the lack of financial literacy. So as I said, late boomers entered the workforce when companies were transitioning from pensions to a more DIY approach to retirement. And at that moment in time, the information to become financially literate wasn't easily accessible. Many of them couldn't go to their parents for advice. There weren't YouTube videos to watch, and there wasn't an abundance of information out there. And also, buying investments wasn't as easy as opening an app, but it was more complex and intimidating that often required a broker. And although these retirement accounts were out there, many boomers didn't know how they worked because no one had dealt with them before, and that caused them to delay retirement, saving in their peak investing years when compound interest makes the biggest difference. Many people perceive boomers as this incredibly fortunate generation where building wealth was so easy. But the reality for late boomers is that throughout their career and at the start of their career, they were met with many disadvantages. And now they are starting to pay the price as they are being forced into retirement. And so let's talk about that in Chapter 4, The Real Cost of Forced Retirement. So as we've been discussing in this video, many late boomers are dedicating their lives to a career or job to ultimately be let go and forced into retirement they're not ready for. And once they reach this point, they don't enter this glamorous image of retirement, often portrayed of freedom, flexibility, and options, but instead they're met with stress and anxiety over money as they enter a new phase of life on an extremely limited income. And so let's paint a picture of what this lifestyle looks like and the concerns that come with it. The first concern is an early start to Social Security. Now, because boomers are being forced out of the workforce and having trouble finding jobs, many of them are being forced to start to withdraw Social Security at a much younger age than they anticipated, leading to a much lower monthly amount. For example, according to the Social Security Administration, beginning Social Security at age 67, the average monthly amount is $1,930. But if you instead started at age 62, your monthly amount would only be $1,342, which is a $588 difference or $7,000 a year. And when you're relying on Social Security alone to survive, that gap could be the difference from affording high-quality groceries or low-quality groceries. And the tough part is that once you start withdrawing Social Security, you are locked into that amount for the rest of your life. The second concern is limited earning potential. Once people start taking on Social Security, they often quickly realize that it alone is not enough to survive and have to take on another job to fill in the gap. Maybe something as simple as working at Walmart. And the sad truth is once you start taking on Social Security early, the government caps how much you can earn to $22,300 a year. And after that, you're heavily taxed until you reach full retirement age. And so basically, best case scenario, you are trapped on $38,404 for those first few years in retirement, even while working part-time, and then have to work even harder once you reach full retirement age to set aside as much as you can until you're physically no longer able to work. The third concern is Medicare gap. This is probably the biggest challenge that you face when you're forced to retire early. You are not eligible to receive Medicare until you're 65. And so if you retire younger, you'll be stuck in this gap until you can receive Medicare. And at that time, you'll either have to live life without health insurance and risk running to high medical bills, or enroll in an expensive private plan with high deductibles and most likely still run into high Medicaid bills. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And most people in their 60s need good health care. And this could even put them in a tougher financial spot and create more problems. That is the reality for many boomers right now who are being forced into retirement. There are no real good options. They're on a limited income, their earning potential is capped, they have no savings, and no health care. And what I've been reflecting on as I've been seeing this play out, although people in my family are going to be okay, is that this is going to happen to every future generation. That is, unless we take the steps to prepare for retirement. And so I want to finish this video with Chapter 5, what we should learn from this. The truth is, forced retirement isn't a boomer problem, but it's something that will inevitably happen to many of us as we get older, because there will come a time when your skills are no longer in demand, when technology has evolved past your abilities, and when companies start to prioritize someone younger, faster, and cheaper. And unless you prepare for that before it happens, you could find yourself in the exact same situation that many boomers are finding themselves in right now. And so I want to finish this video with 3 key takeaways. 1, build your retirement before you need it. As we've uncovered in this video, retirement isn't always a choice, but sometimes it's something you're forced into. And so it's important to take steps now to prepare for that moment. To live debt-free, regularly contribute to retirement accounts, and become financially literate. If you do those things, you won't have to worry about factors beyond your control because you'll be ready for it. 2, don't rely on the system to feed you. Too many people assume that the system will always take care of them, that their job will be around forever, Social Security will be enough, and they will always have health care. But as we've seen in this video, those things won't always take care of you. And so it's important to take the steps to develop your own personal financial safety net so you will be protected from the system. And the final takeaway is don't dedicate yourself too much to your job. So as I said earlier in the video, the word that describes watching someone go through this is sobering. Because you see someone who has dedicated so much of their life to a company or an industry and has given them so much. They were loyal, they worked hard, they sacrificed time, energy, and sometimes their health, only to one day be escorted out of the building with their box full of stuff and 3 months severance pay. That is the inevitable ending of this corporate game that we are all playing. And when you see this play out to people that you know, it makes you understand that companies are always going to prioritize their bottom line over your well-being. And so it is so important to take the steps to develop relationships outside of work, develop hobbies outside of work, take care of your health, and pursue a purpose beyond a paycheck. Because one day, your job will end, and when that moment comes, you'll, one, hope you have enough money set aside for retirement, but also, two, hope that you made rich memories outside of your job. And so live your life and prepare for retirement. I hope you enjoyed this video. This is probably my longest video I've ever made, but let me know how you feel about this topic in the comment section. And with that, muchas gracias. Que tenga un buen día. Nos vemos, chicos.